Bitte sehr.
With the microphone. Here you go.
Yes.
First, we need to manage this technology. Okay, can you hear me? Yes, colleagues. Yes, now I think we are okay with the technology. So, dear colleagues, we have today a discussion on the reform metrics that the government developed, and I would like to introduce our members of the panel. This is Sergei Marchenko, Minister of Finance of Ukraine, Mr. Arup Banerjee, the director from the World Bank, regional director, the Deputy Minister of Economy, Alexei Sobolev, and Natalia Shapoval of Kyiv School of Economics. So I will start first by saying that the government of Ukraine last week adopted the reform metrics, and it was extensively presented and discussed during the multi-agency donor coordination platform and during the plenary sessions in the URC. So first I would like to ask Sergei, please could you tell us what are the reasons for the government to develop the reform metrics, and what are the intentions of the government with the reform metrics? Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you. First of all, let me tell that we're so grateful for our partners which help us to develop such a tool. It's a World Bank, it's Kyiv School of Economics, it's a Reform Delivery Office, it's a Harvard Laboratory, Ricardo Hausman and other participants which were involved, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finance, because it helped us to identify the list of reforms which we already agreed with our partners, which we submitted, and which we are ready to implement it. Because traditionally it was like a black box, nobody cares about our reforms except of some ministries, which is in charge of these reforms. Now it's a very public document and very flexible structure, which help all participants and all public, civil society, different expert group to realize what is going on in the process of reform in Ukraine, what is our priorities, what's our current expectations, and what's our limitation as well. Because to be honest with you, the key idea to show that our capacity to implement reform is rather limited. It's not governmental capacities, it's joint capacities of all general government, I mean parliament and government. Because if you're talking about reforms, it's constant necessity to amend some legislation, and it needed some time to prepare it and to get necessary votes in parliament. That's why the idea of this matrix to show that we already under our limits and our capacity are not without limits, and we should think about prioritization. And moreover, we identify that our metrics of reforms will not cover our great needs, will not cover our needs for speedy economic growth, and we identify that we also need to do other necessary reforms in different other areas, which are not related to governance, which are not related for other very important reforms. This is my like observing for what we have right now.
So it's very clear the rationale for the development of reform metrics, and colleagues, you can see on the screen there is a QR code, and you can familiarize yourselves with the website and the reform metrics, which is now publicly available. And I would like to turn to Mr. Banerjee and ask the following question. We have so the reform matrix contains over 200 of various steps, conditionalities only for 2024. So are these reforms enough? Are they sufficient for Ukraine to develop, to sustain economic growth?
Thanks, Tatiana. Before I answer your question, I actually want to make an observation. We're here at the URC. 3 years ago, when I attended the URC, it was called the Ukraine Reform Conference. Right? Now it's called the Ukraine Recovery Conference. But the need for reforms has not gone away. It has changed, And as this reform matrix shows, it has deepened. And I'm really, really amazed at the government's commitment, Sergey, for undertaking this huge array of demanding reforms that you're doing because you believe it needs to be done. Now, we could argue, and we will. We can argue, and we will, about how soon, which ones first, are they sufficient? And I think this is important. But I think we need to step back and talk about the fact that there is a huge array of reforms that Ukraine had started a long time ago and is continuing. Now, what is the context of, as Sergey said, what should be these reforms about? Right now, the single most urgent economic need for Ukraine is economic growth. And I think that is the point, because economic growth gives, Sergey, you more revenues. Economic growth allows jobs and livelihoods for the population. Economic growth reduces poverty. And economic growth, very importantly, and Alexei, you'll talk about this more, quickens the path to EU accession, because Ukraine has to reach a certain level of income to actually become a EU member state. And that's, I think, the challenge, that Ukraine needs a strategy to sustain economic growth even while the war is going on, and that the war, unfortunately, will not end very soon. And that is something that you're struggling with. So in that context, I need to come to your question. Yeah, the reforms in the matrix are, as they say in mathematics, necessary but not sufficient. These are all reforms that will be needed for Ukraine for a host of reasons. But for getting quick economic growth, they are probably not all urgent and not all immediately needed. The big elephant in the room, so to speak, is security. How will economic growth come? Economic growth will come because private firms will invest more and more, and these firms will grow, and therefore there will be employment, incomes, consumption, and growth. Right? So investment and consumption will lead to growth. Without air defense, without security from the missiles, private firms are unlikely to come in the volumes that are needed. And so there are missing elements. Another element that I'd like to highlight is, of course, labor. These reforms don't actually cover the labor market at all. I was just now in a panel talking about some of these labor issues with your colleague, Mr. Zhelenovich. And the challenge for labor is that, as all of you know, Ukraine was actually shrinking because of demographic pressures even before the war. And now the war has resulted in huge amounts of displacement of Ukraine's people. So even if there is investment, even if capital flows in, is there sufficient labor to meet those capital demands and to create the economic growth that's needed? So these are the challenges. So in a way, to conclude, Ukraine just faces today very bravely and with great determination a balancing act. It's a balancing act between today and the needs of today and the prospects of tomorrow. It is a balancing act between resilience today and recovery and growth in the future. And to make sure, and this is what the challenge of the reform matrix and what you're going to be doing this year and over the next years is, and Alexei, it is to make sure that these reforms for resilience and for recovery reinforce each other and don't contradict each other. And therefore, the sum of these reforms will be larger than the individual reforms themselves. In conclusion, I also want to commend, Sergey, you and the authorities for something that was remarked yesterday at the MDCP, and I want to share it with this larger audience. In my experience, I've never seen a country that actually has published all the reforms that it's going to do and it has committed to do publicly, transparently, for anyone to access and anyone to see. It is a commitment mechanism that you're putting out. It's politically really difficult. And I really want you for this commitment to transparency and this commitment to an inclusive process of reforms.
Thank you so much, Arup. So, building on your statement on the balancing act between reforms and resilience and economic growth, I would like to turn to Deputy Minister Alexei Sobolev and ask you to tell us a little bit about the white paper on economic growth that describes this balancing act, and what are the immediate steps that are necessary for Ukraine to boost economic growth.
Thank you very much. So all the parties that Sergei have mentioned were working on this white paper, and what we found out. So basically, we were trying to rank and trying to quantify the impact of the reforms on economic growth, macroeconomic stability, the growth prospects, budget, like revenue mobilization, attracting private capital, etc. So to rank them all, to understand which ones are more kind of growth conducive and which ones are less, to understand if we would have to prioritize which would come first. So what we found out are like three big blocks of reforms that we need to do simultaneously to attain growth. The first one are macroeconomic policies that make Ukraine more self-reliant, so that generate revenue to the budget, for example. So this is tax and customs reforms, and getting rid of quasi-fiscal distortions, and the general like macroeconomic and price stability reforms. So that's one. The second one is we need to improve the governance of the state institutions. So we need to better coordinate the regional policy that will allow more projects, more investments, for example. Then we need to produce more plans and more strategies, and we need to reform prosecution agencies and like law enforcement agencies to be able to attract more investment. And the third part are the structural reforms that work in different sectors. So the sectors you can, for example, look up in the Ukraine plan. So these reforms will allow more investment, like reforms in the energy sector will allow to get more private capital in the energy sector. Reforms in agriculture will allow more investment in the agriculture, etc. So these are like three main blocks. But what we also found is that even like when we do all the reforms, as Sergei said, it will not be enough. What we need, we need more investment to be able to get to the average GDP per capita of EU within the next 10 years. We need at least 10 to 30 billion of annual investment in Ukraine. We need or like investment or technology transfer in Ukraine. We need also access to markets, right? So to Ukraine to be able to sell its goods, because the level of growth that Ukraine needs to achieve to be able to integrate into EU is usually right export oriented. So this needs to be done, which means that with the reforms that Ukraine is doing, we need to have some kind of plans of additional investment, technology transfer, and market access. And I think one of the great things about Ukraine plan that we developed together with the EU is that it has both the reforms and then the investment embedded in it, and some part of market access through a single market. But we need, and this is long term, like 4 years. So this is a great blueprint to start this, but the next stage would be kind of getting into investments, getting into practical projects. But I think this conference is all about that, which I think also great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexei. So building also on your points on the critical aspects to boost economic growth, I would like to turn now to Natalia Shapoval of the Kyiv School of Economics. You are doing enormous work to help the government on all fronts, on reconstruction, on reforms, and I would like to ask you what is the logic of prioritization of these reforms? How do you approach this? How can you say that one reform has more impact than other?
Thank you, Tatiana. So indeed, we were part of the team of economic experts who tried to look into the all 400 indicators just for 2024 and see which of them, of these regulations, reforms, laws, would have economic effect sometime soon. And so we made very basic evaluation so far. We will continue this, but we looked what is the economic impact on the labor, on capital, on investment. What is the effect on the security situation, on the logistics, on the energy. And what we see is that most of the reforms, they have very little effect soon. So there is a huge block, which is a macroeconomic block, which is related to public finance, tax reform, customs reforms, a huge block related to business climate and attracting investments like public investment management framework. And this block creates like output that economists can measure. You know, we're gonna have more tax revenues, more labor, workplaces, something. But then there is a huge block, like 135 measures of these indicators just for this year in the, for example, EU enlargement report. And economists cannot say what's gonna be here soon from this. And we see that it is super important to have, you know, some milestones on this way towards EU, that not it's just government has 200 indicators a year and they don't have what to say to the general public what's gonna happen as a result. So these milestones are really critical, and until there is some actual promise that reforms, actions trigger the investment, the capital, like Alexei presented about the Ukrainian plan, you know, no economist can promise anything beyond, you know, in 10 years, we will become like Poland or Romania. That we can say, but, you know, it's not practical. And I would like to mention again 400 indicators for this year. And all of these measures, they are primarily the recommendations or conditions for the economic support. So it's just little part of what the government is doing. And I know if there are like donors community here, partners, it's really critical to hear that while government is doing all of these indicators, they are not working on the, you know, security situation, on the energy recovery, on structural reforms. So of course there is always an incentive to have like small steps, like to micromanage what Ukraine is doing. But then it prevents, you know, thinking of large things like large judicial reform, you know, retrain all the judges. We will not see it, but it should be done, you know, to get this effect. So we plan to continue this exercise, especially given the importance of the EU track for Ukraine, and to, you know, try to do what we can as expert community to inform, you know, what's gonna be best, and maybe protect you know, the whole country from doing too many without proper impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia. So I would just like to quickly ask one question of everyone. What you would say is the single most important step that the government and the donors should work towards to really materialize on this work that was done on the reform metrics? What should be our next step? What should we strive towards, considering the situation before the end of this year? So yes, I will just ask for very brief comment on the next steps. Sergey.
Well, I think that the fact that we already organize our work in a proper way, we have a governmental decree which identify responsibilities of all governmental bodies, specifically Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economy, and Secretariat of Cabinet Ministries. It helps us a lot because we include metrics of reform in our bureaucracy. It means that another day we have a very particular person in different ministries who is in charge of this particular process. It helps us to make it a reliable instrument. It creates some trust for this process because, for example, we expect in the fourth review of IMF program this month. It means that we should adjust our reform metrics. We should include some additional structural benchmark. We should make it a proper wording of this, and we should identify very clear responsible ministries which should be in charge of these particular reforms. It's just one example how it should work. And I believe that the next steps we should also include 2025, 2026, 2027, and all of these years to show that this is a broader picture. And I just want to mention another very specific topic which we would like to work at, that we try to implement reforms starting from 2010, 2014. We already do a lot, and it was proposal from our ambassadors of the United States, Moksana Markarova, to include in this particular matrix all reforms which already Ukraine have implemented. And it will be necessary to show us a good track records which what we already done, specifically related for very acute topics of Ukraine's agenda. It will be necessary to show our partners that we are not in the beginning. We are in the middle or in a final destination. But it's not enough, because without ownership, I want to stress this, without ownership of governmental bodies to implement different reforms, it will not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen if somebody try to impose it, because leadership is matter, but sometimes ownership is more important than leadership.
Yes, and we are grateful to the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Economy for leadership in this process and for ownership of the reform matrix. Arup, over to you on the critical next step.
Thanks. Since I'm the only representative of partners represented in this panel, maybe I'll talk about what partners need to do, besides actually pay attention to the reform matrix. And we've already started doing this, which is actually what the reform matrix exposes is that from the partner side, we have actually reforms suggested to Ukraine that overlap somewhat, right? But are cast in slightly different ways. And one of the things that we've already begun, and will, under your leadership, Sergei, we will continue to do, is to align, right? So it's not three different reforms. It's not three different reforms. It's one reform supported in different ways by three different partners. And I think that, again, as Alexei said, given the Ukraine plan, which already sets out a slightly longer term issue, it is a question of us working in a dynamic way to understand which of these reforms in the Ukraine plan can meet with the reforms from other partners, and to make sure that you are met with a track that is clear, that is well defined and well agreed.
Thank you, Arup. Alexei, I will turn over to you on the critical next step on reform matrix for the Ministry of Economy.
I don't know. For us, we take, for example, Ukraine plan, which we are a national coordinator. We're gonna develop an IT system that gonna help to do exactly what Sergei was saying, to track reforms and on a deeper technical level, to understand how it's moving, if there are problems, etc., and to showcase that this is possible and then very transparent. But I think it would be good for all of us and all our partners and all the reform junkies listening in right now that I think that are looking at us to look at that, see the reforms, see the assessments that we did, maybe discuss a bit, and then while thinking about the new ways and the priorities, kind of taking that into account, and we'll be adding to that. So, because this is our joint effort with the whole 2,000 people being present here. It's not just Ukraine's, but it's a world's issue. But I think it's also very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. Natalia, so over to you on the next steps for the civil society, for the analytical centers to support the reform matrix.
So there will be some technical steps, like we will add maybe next year's till 2027 or something to have the whole agenda. But also I hope we can already, after this URC conference, we can add something like investment tracker to reform tracker. And to see the results of all the memorandums and the top-ups from the Ukraine plan, how they materialize into the actual projects, technology transfer, as it was mentioned in the white paper authored by people on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. So with this, we will conclude, and I would like to thank all of our members of the panel for this amazing work that was done. And colleagues, I will announce that the next section will start in 15 minutes. It will be presentation of international flagship projects. Thank you, colleagues.